So we are very lucky to have two of the best people on the planet, Vinod and Carl, who are going to join me in a minute to talk about this first great revolution, the rebalancing between minds and machines. Let me introduce Carl, who I hope is in here somewhere. There he is. So Carl was until recently the CEO at Autodesk. He was also the CTO, the COO, and a number of other positions. He likes to build things and make things, whether it's chairs or desks or boats or lately, I think, electronic go-karts. So please join me in welcoming Carl Bass. And you also, probably most of you know Vinod Khosla, founder of and supporter of innumerable Silicon Valley companies, going back to Sun Microsystems, managing director of Khosla Ventures. I recently had the privilege of speaking at his CEO summit where all his startup folks came together. I thought it was dozens, but it's more like hundreds or more CEOs of his startups were there. And they're all young and brimming with enthusiasm, matched only by Vinod's enthusiasm. So please join me.
Thanks, Erik.
Thanks, Vinod. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about the rebalancing. And let me start with a quote that Sundar Pichai said just a couple weeks ago. He said that we are moving from a 10-year period where we were mobile first to a 10-year period where we are AI first. So let's start with you, Vinod. What do you think of that? Is that a fair characterization of where we're going?
Absolutely. Completely agree. I would say AI delivered through conversational AI will completely change the platforms and how we think of apps and applications.
And are you making investments along those lines accordingly?
Absolutely. I view apps and AI delivered through conversational AI, both are AI pieces, so it's a little confusing, as a brand new and very exciting platform.
Great. And Carl, one of the things that people say is that, well, AI and machines are great at doing things we've already taught them how to do, but they can't be creative. And ultimately, creativity is a bastion where we humans have the advantage and machines aren't going to be able to encroach on that. What's your sense of whether machines can be creative or how and whether they contribute, particularly in the design area?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting question. Will they ever be creative, imaginative, funny? Those kind of attributes. It's a little bit hard to know, but I think some of the things that we thought were the traditional boundaries are breaking all the time. So I brought an image. If you can bring it up.
Can we bring up that?
Yeah, bring up that first image. Maybe. Okay, we can see it on the screen here.
There it is.
There it is. Okay. So that's a picture of a heat exchanger. And this heat exchanger was designed by a computer. And I don't mean designed on a computer, so let's be incredibly clear about what that means. What was done by the engineer is they specified the outcome that they wanted. They talked about the thermodynamic properties, they talked about the space envelope the thing needed to fill, and after hundreds of thousands of CPU hours, that's the heat exchanger that came out. And what I think is interesting about it are two things. One, I think it's incredibly beautiful. And two, by the virtue of the way it was done with machine learning, it's nearly optimal. That combination is astounding. So
how does it, when you say nearly optimal, how does it compare to heat exchangers designed by humans?
Way better. You can see the complexity in it. Generally speaking, we've seen when we use machines to do classic engineering problems, somewhere between a 20 and 40% increase in performance. And it doesn't really matter about the domain. This is whether it's thermodynamics or computational fluid dynamics in this case, or structures. Almost any domain seems to be subject to what we think is the limit is not really the limit at all. And it comes out of this, the fundamental idea is, in all of these areas, I think we've used computers incorrectly. We've we've treated them as a scarce and precious resource. We time-shared them. You didn't have enough of it.
Yeah.
And if you flip the thing on its head and you say, how would I design and engineer things differently, or take it to another domain? How would I do this activity if I had all the computing power in the world? So as right now a CPU hour is 2 cents, and
Right. Well, yeah.
on its way to nothing, and totally available.
That is, I mean, in fairness, when MIT invented time sharing, it was a lot more expensive. So, but now we have a different set of resource constraints where we can be wasteful and try a lot of CPU cycles on things that maybe wouldn't have been worth paying for before.
Yeah. And so you look at this and you go, so it takes 100,000 hours at 2 cents. I mean, what would it have taken to have a small army of engineers design something, and the result is not as good.
So you showed me around your office. It was like an art museum of all the things that were being designed. I think you have a couple other pictures of a few other things. I don't know whether these are art or
this is part of a wishbone suspension from an automobile.
This is an automobile suspension.
Yeah, and so in this case, this is a structural problem. You can see the places where there are mounting holes that were specified. It could only fill up a certain amount of space because other things on the car took the other space. You knew what the loads on it needed to be.
So the human specifies the constraints, where it has to fit, what the loads it has to handle, and then it goes and iterates and tries
it goes
a bunch
in,
of things.
And in this case, it's stronger and stiffer, stiffer, and lighter than the original. And this is a design that's been made for the last 25 years, essentially the same.
So one more, just because it's so cool.
Because they're cool looking.
Yeah, I think they're fun to look. I want to have these in my lobby, I think.
And this is the frame from a motorcycle. And again, so what's interesting about this, and I've worked on problems in automotive and aerospace, actually the hardest problem is now becoming not the computer from when it gets its input to outputs that are this beautiful and functional. And this is just a clear case of, I would say, form follows forces. You specify the forces, and this thing deals with it. I think the more difficult thing that I've seen in practice is much of engineering is done by convention, rule of thumb, us experts. It's the core saying this is what it really is. And then you find out those aren't actually the real requirements. And I think that's where it brings in a whole nother domain of we're now able to go out and capture, monitor, so-called Internet of Things. We can capture the real requirements by measuring things in use and feeding those into the computer. And as you close that loop, that's when I think you get significantly better products.
Tell me more about,
so let me address the other end of creativity. Professor David Cope at UC Santa Cruz written a program called Emily How can outcompete in any human in composing music in a particular style, say Bach. There was in fact.
How do you measure outcompete?
So there was a classical music professor at Yale who got really upset at this claim. And so they had a bake-off. He wrote 6 pieces, the computer wrote 6 pieces, and they had an independent panel judge it. Guess what?
Were the judges human or were the judges machines?
The judges were human. They were blind, and they judged the machine-composed music as obviously human, more complex, more nuanced.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
There's a great Google program, and I won't take time on slides, that takes any picture and paints it in any style. So you can take a picture and paint it in a Picasso style. I don't know if
What do you mean? You take like a photograph? Actually, we have this. Let's go ahead and bring it up.
Yeah.
If you bring up, I think it's a couple slides ahead. One more.
One more.
Yeah, that one.
So you take that picture, which is a photograph, compose it in the style below, and you get a new picture. This is done by a computer. Can you go one more slide? This is a computer program that takes 2 physical instruments and creates a new instrument which can create new tones in music.
You mean like a harp? You mean like the musical instrument, a harp and a clarinet?
Yes. You can combine those 2 and combine its dynamic range. Just one more. One more slide. So this is a program that creates abstract paintings called Google Deep Dream. You can try it yourself. So
looks like it's on drugs.
What's creativity? It's hard to even define. At the other extreme, I've had programs say what enzyme will do a certain job. That's very much a scientist's job, and computers do pretty damn good at it.
Well, so that begs the question, so what is it that, where do humans have an advantage then? What if machines are being this creative, Carl, where do you see the balance? I mean, you still have designers buying Autodesk software.
I mean, look, people are still buying pens and pencils to write. People are still composing music. I wouldn't take it away, I wouldn't take it away from them, but it's very difficult to understand where the boundaries are. I think, as you said, we're very early in what's capable in these, deep learning, machine learning methods. I would be hesitant to say right now that there's something with certainty I know that 10 or 20 or 30 years from now.
Let's not go 10 or 20 years. What about today? I mean, or let me give you some East Coast skepticism.
I mean, computers aren't funny. I haven't heard a computer joke that I thought was like yet. But he limited me to like today. I haven't heard a funny computer joke. I haven't read a novel by a computer that I think is better than the best novels.
So when I talk to my economist friends, and I try to tell them some of the Kool-Aid I get from you guys,
a little bit.
They say, wait a minute, Erik, productivity is not growing particularly fast. It's growing more slowly now than it was 20 years ago. And there are a lot of people whose incomes aren't rising a whole lot. So how do you reconcile that? How is it that these are these amazing things, yet we're not seeing big productivity growth?
Look, the definition of productivity and GDP is just plain wrong now. It was great when you manufactured things and had value assigned to them and you sold them.
Like Andy's...
Me doing a Google search before Google, I went to the library, I did my research, it was a $100 project. Today, that was a lot of GDP measures.
Yeah.
Today, that's measured as 0 on the GDP scale. So all these virtual goods, these free services, they're not measured. When the price of a computer, cars, they've generally only marginally changed in price in real dollars over time.
Right.
A $1,000 computer can cost $100. The GDP declines when the numbers go up. So I think the GDP metrics are screwed up, and so economists should start looking at this afresh.
Yeah, I think a lot of economists are concerned about the measures, but if I take what you're saying very seriously.
But you asked a different question also. So the question of measurement is one. Productivity, and we're in this phase, and this relates to what humans do. Productivity is today really being enhanced by machines more in the bionic assist mode. I think it's being measured wrong. But we're not in the true AI phase. And we're
still early.
Very early in the cycle, in a relatively inefficient part of the cycle. But productivity and abundance can happen in a very large way. And in fact, I'm pretty sure will happen. But that doesn't mean equality and income disparity won't happen. In fact, almost certainly, and I wrote about this in Forbes in 2014, I think, we'll have great abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth, and increasing income disparity because people won't have jobs. That's very high productivity when the denominator goes to 0.
The wealth is added, but it's not as evenly distributed. Yeah.
Those are different questions.
Yeah, that is a different question. I want to get the audience engaged a little bit. If you guys have questions or comments, and while you guys think of things you might want to ask, Carl, what are your thoughts on that? Are you seeing that designers are that much more productive but it's not being measured, or is it something that we're looking at that's going to happen in the next 5, 10 years ahead of us?
So I would definitely second Vinod's thing. I think the productivity measure is just the wrong measure.
Okay.
So let's start with that. I also agree totally on, as a matter of fact, Erik and Andy, you guys remember, I first got introduced to you because probably half a dozen years ago, I had the strong belief that as we were encoding knowledge and to some degree wisdom and certainly craft and skill, that you were going to increasingly lose jobs, and I didn't think we were going to keep up with it. and I was walking around the world kind of BSing about this. And they said, you should meet Andy and Erik. They actually know what they're talking about, as opposed to you, who just have a lot of opinions. They've actually backed this up, and that's really how we first met. And so I am no more optimistic about how wealth gets distributed than I was half a dozen years ago. If anything, I'm more concerned. And one of the things I see as we create each of these new things, each of these new technologies seems to have this effect that it's kind of bimodal. With each technology, we create a very small handful of people who are more expert and more valuable than ever before. For example, you can see the craziness right now in this neighborhood of hiring people who are experts in machine learning. There's $1 million bounty on the heads of people who know machine learning. Every startup, every established company is struggling to find that skill. Also, there seems to be a class of technicians, for lack of a better word. There are people who can use these technologies. You sum those together, and while the dollar output may be greater, certainly you don't create jobs. It doesn't keep up. I mean, you just start with the Uber Lyft example. When we get to autonomous vehicles, there is no way to make up for all the people who make a living with transportation. Go through any industry in which it's going to get displaced. As I've spent the last 35 years encoding knowledge digitally, there are things that you can now do anywhere in the world, which I think leads to the question of productivity. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
In order to machine something, piece of metal, you're going to just make a pocket. If you asked three college-educated people up here how we would make the tool move, one of us would go back and forth this way, one maybe this way, one would circle in, one would circle out, and we could program and do it. About 10 years ago, people realized that by far the most effective way to do that is this crazy mathematical formula. There's a crazy pattern. It's kind of equivalent to putting a pencil on the end of a wheel and rolling it. Looks like a spirograph. It's called trochoids. It's the mathematical family of curves. Turns out it's a constant load on the tool, and it leads to the most effective cutting. It is the best tool life. It has a bunch of other really good properties, and no human being in their right mind could program that. So you encode it into software, you ship it to millions of people in the world.
Which part do you code the concept or the...
The math. And so now, given any area, any person anywhere in the world with a $1,000 piece of software can cut metal better than the best machinist was ever able to do this before. What you've done is locally you've made the value of that person's skill go way down. Now there's still a handful of machinists working at aerospace companies whose skills are incredibly valuable, and you've created this other class of people who can run this software. But the idea that there were lots of local experts that were highly paid and highly valued is disappearing. I think that goes across industries.
What are some of the interesting AI examples like that you've seen, Vinod?
What's shocking to me is how many areas of what is employment, if I want to go back there, are being replicated. Now, there's very cool examples. My favorite one is one of our companies doing a bot. It's called Replica that starts to learn who you are and talk like you.
Really?
In fact, so much so, and they came on this idea, they were building on some other AI systems, and this girl's best friend died in a car accident, and she built this. And 6 months later, the person who died, their mother, was still talking to the bot.
Well, that's creepy.
I know it's creepy, but...
So it's like that you showed the example of making pictures in the style of Van Gogh.
But
you could make conversation in the style of whoever?
Yeah, conversations in the style, and by the way, in the exact voice of whoever, not this robotic voice you're used to from computers. It may be the perfect Dear Diary application.
It's a perfect fake news application, I think, too. You can
that too.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
So, it's hard to imagine.
Is that something we can see? Is there like a link?
Oh, yeah, you can sign up. They're limiting the beta because there's so much demand. But Replica is the company, and you can sign up for one of these bots that replicates you and uses language initially over text messaging that's your language. So whether it's that we're doing farm machinery where machine vision drives the field and replaces herbicides.
Yeah.
So you can, in fact, this morning I talked to the guys, they were in Lovelock, Texas, doing a cornfield, getting rid of pigweed with no herbicides.
Do they just like physically grab it or something?
They actually over-fertilize the pigweed to burn it to death, so the fertilizer is then used by the plant.
So they target it.
But the key is differentiating the pigweed from the cotton plant. Or harvesting. There's tens of thousands of acres of lettuce being thinned out, usually done by machine workers, by farm workers.
By human workers, yeah.
Yeah, no. Go ahead. Sorry, Vinod.
I mean, it's hard to imagine. Can we go to that one slide, the very first one?
Go back to the bar chart. Is that the one?
Yeah. So this was the top 20 application places where occupations in the United States. When I looked at it, the majority of them will have the majority of those jobs go away with technologies that I know are being worked on today, even if it'll take 15 years or 20 years to...
Pick one of those bar charts and tell us a technology that's going to affect one of them.
Well, truck drivers, right?
Well, no, that's too easy. No,
That's too easy. And by the way, for those people who say it's even that is 10 years away, there's a startup that decided to do just one route from Dallas to LA, is $1 billion of revenue, 10,000 trucks plowing one route. So they can do it in 2 years because it's one route, no exits, no street driving. The trucks just park on.
So the truck just does the highway part. They get it onto the highway and then say go.
Yeah, very cool. So, and then you learn a lot.
There's like a tugboat at the either end that sort of takes it into the dock.
Right. Yeah. So
How about some of those big ones at the top there, like.
So food prep is one of my favorites. Very close to here. There's a robot that makes hamburgers.
I had these. They were delicious.
Right? Yeah. It can fresh grind the meat for you, fresh sliced tomatoes, fresh sliced onions, build custom robots, 150 an hour, the same output as a McDonald's restaurant.
Well, no, it's better. I mean, the fun part of it was that it was like you said, it's very custom. I think it was at your summit, they were grinding different kinds of meat together.
Yeah.
You could have,
you can mix two different kinds of meat. You can custom cook it. You can custom flavor. You can even custom flavor through the patty. And the production cost is lower than McDonald's because there's no labor and no huge kitchen capex.
Let's get some questions from the audience. You can see, so back here. So we have these microphones, and I'm going to toss it to you, okay? I'm told that I'm not liable so can you catch it?
A good throw.
Working? I can work for the Warriors now. Okay.
I think so. That's
quick
3
question.
points.
Machine would do that better.
No way. That's
better.
going too far.
So I'm Harbo Jensen. Question for Carl Bass. The examples you gave of design of the heat exchanger and the motorcycle frame were aimed at the final use of the product. Can you and the stresses that are on it, can you also use that, or do you see it working in terms of the manufacturability other than having to do 3D printing or something?
Yeah, so one of the interesting examples that I often show is, boom.
All right. We have another one around that doesn't have to be tossed as much, so okay. Is there another, we can get the mic over there, less dramatically.
So one of the interesting examples I usually show is the full cycle, where we took a car, we went out and recorded all the stresses on a car, and then the thing that got integrated into this optimization framework was how it was manufactured. And there were 3 choices. The first one was make the frame out of standard off-the-shelf cylindrical tubes. And it came back, and this was like a dune buggy looking vehicle, and it came back looking like a dune buggy but optimized. And then we said, doesn't need to be off the shelf. And now this is one of the things in conversational AI, is the computer played a cruel joke. It came back with small tubes, but they were like this big, and it had hundreds of thousands of them. And then the last one we said, change the material to titanium instead of, in this case, chromoly. And what does it come back with? It comes back looking like a snowflake because titanium is so strong. And so really the essence of many of these things, many of these methodologies, is that you can quantify it. So long as you know something about the manufacturability, I mean, I've been working on it. There's a number of companies out there that are actually doing really interesting things in which anything you can kind of put a value on, so the manufacturability, both binary as well as difficulty, is done.
So the questioner made you not include 3D printing, but I'm going to remove that constraint briefly. Talk about how additive manufacturing combines with these technologies.
Yeah, I mean, like that heat exchanger really is something that needs to be 3D printed.
Can we bring that back up?
Yeah, that would be a difficult form to manufacture. But just as well, if you went to back to the input for the algorithm, and you said it had to be made in a way that could only be cast, where there's a bunch of limitations that you can encode the rules for casting, the smallest size that can be done, something about the topology that you can reach it. You could encode that too and actually get the same thing. So it's totally doable. By the way, I just wanted to, on Vinod's chart, the coolest startup I saw the other day
the bar chart, yeah.
Yeah, the bar chart is, and this gets rid of the proverbial, startup in a garage. I saw these three guys south of the ballpark, and what they were doing, they had taken a lot, knocked everything down on it, put up a Quonset hut, and they were doing autonomous construction equipment. And all you were doing was inputting a site plan, and the thing would run around the site. It would dig trenches or a swimming pool.
What was the thing? What was it? It was like a robot?
It was a bobcat.
A bobcat?
Yeah, it was like a bobcat bulldozer. And it was interesting, and I really liked it because it was layering on top. They weren't trying to reinvent the bulldozer or the backhoe.
They're using these.
They were just saying it's there. These things are now computer controlled, and if we could give it better instructions than a human could. And what was cool about it is it dug a trench, it dug a big hole like a swimming pool. You hit the reset button, and it flattened the site back out. And you put in a new set of plans, and you can get another one. And so you
had compliment to that. I sent Eric this whole slide deck. I don't have that slide here, where there's a robot that lays bricks six times faster than a human being.
And before the panel, we were talking about the different building blocks, and Andy's AlphaGo example. You had some thoughts about the different building blocks that went into that, and where we're going next.
So to me, AlphaGo is really interesting. I love Andy's example. There's a couple of additional things that people generally don't know. So first, Lee Sedol, before he played AlphaGo, used to beat humans 75% of the time. After training with AlphaGo, he now beats other humans 90% of the time. So he's gotten much better.
Until they learn from AlphaGo, right?
Yeah. So Lee Sedol learned moves from AlphaGo.
Yeah, like that fourth row, yeah.
The other thing that's really interesting into this creativity question, when Go experts were asked to judge AlphaGo's performance, the words they used were really creative and great intuition.
Great intuition.
Like that was the characteristic that was.
You said it had some building blocks that went together.
So here to me is why it's foolhardy to forecast the future. This stunning performance by AlphaGo was put together by using three relatively normal AI components in a clever combination, but not a research breakthrough combination. And I've identified at least 15 major new directions of what I'll call in 3 years new components. So we go from 3 or 5 components today to
what were some of the components in the other one, just to make it more concrete?
Adversarial networks, transfer learning, Bayes nets, policy networks, graph models. These are very different than deep learning models. Some of them are going exactly the opposite. And I'll give you one great example that is sort of scary and stunning. But if we go from 3 or 5 components that can beat Go champions, imagine if you had 15 or 20 or 30 of these components, you could put together the combinatorial explosion of capability is almost impossible to imagine today. So can we go forward to that last graph I had?
That one?
No, all the way to the end. So this is really interesting because this was encryption algorithms for security designed by adversarial networks. So these essentially two agents were asked to come up with encryption schemes, and a third agent called Eve was asked to break the encryption scheme. So these computer agents fought each other, and guess what? The two agents charged with developing, here called Bob, with developing an algorithm, came up with an encryption algorithm Eve couldn't understand, and no human could understand or crack.
Okay, let's get a couple more questions. I think we got one over here.
Yes. Okay. I would like you to address the sociological issue, because I think that pretty much all the people in the audience, you're preaching to the converted on the issues of how this technology ought to be used. On the other hand, if you look at the resistance, even in places where you would expect otherwise, take Microsoft, for example. Do you believe for an instant that if AI were used to develop the next operating system, that it would look anything like Windows 10? I don't think so.
So there's a lot of sociological questions. You know, capitalism was designed for efficiency. One fundamental question to ask, is efficiency still our goal when we have great abundance? Should we be focusing on income equality? Because frankly, we will, left to its own devices, capitalism will result in more efficiency, more creativity, even invent ways to brainwash you to buy things you don't need, which advertisers are doing relatively well, but machines will do way better at. So the question is, what's the goal of capitalism? And if it results in great income disparity, and this is what my 2014 Forbes piece was about, we will need to socially and politically address this. And I talked about some form of universal basic income in 2014 on that issue. Now, I will say the following. The good news is capitalism is by permission of democracy, and it can be revoked. Mm-hmm. So separate from the question of is capitalism the right thing and efficiency the right goal in an era of great abundance, mm-hmm. is this other question.
Do you see the forces right now driving towards a lot more inequality, towards winner take most, winner take all markets?
Clearly, if half of the categories have most of the jobs in those categories, and I think it'll be 80% of the jobs mm-hmm. are replaced, mm-hmm. We will have inequality. Mm-hmm. We will have unemployment. We will also have enough GDP to easily afford universal basic income. Mm-hmm. It's hard to imagine. We're linear thinkers, and these curves are exponentials. Mm-hmm. So hard to imagine, but I'm pretty sure we'll have enough per capita income where the average might be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, even in today's dollars.
What kind of time? I mean, we're nothing like that right now. I mean, and like I said.
Yeah, but right now in 40 or 50 years from now, a very different world.
Okay. So you're talking 40, 50 years from now.
I think this is a fairly large thing. The other thing which economists always recommend is education solves the problem. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry it doesn't, because if you don't need a designer for your mechanicals, mm-hmm. if you don't need a radiologist for reading a chart, and radiology will go away in 5 years, if you don't need an oncologist, I can't imagine why a human oncologist could add value given the amount of data in oncology.
Really?
Right? They can't possibly comprehend all the things that are possible. So education, I suspect, will not be quite the solution for employment. There's other values to education, so we'll have to...
Wow. Let's take some questions. I think there's one in the back here, or over... Yeah, here we go.
I agree completely with Vinod. The question is,
Can you speak into the mic? Yeah.
oh, sorry. The question is, what is government's ability to keep up with the changes taking place in society? You already have an outbreak of populism on globalization and automation. So if you add AI to the mix, how does it not break?
Well, it is populism, and that's what I mean by democracy. Capitalism is by permission of democracy, and democracy can revoke capitalistic privileges or rules. Or I think that's what will happen.
Carl?
No, I agree. I don't think populism is an irrational response. You know, if you look at the elections in Europe, if you look at what happened in the U.S., it's a perfectly rational response to legislate around this, and and to limit what happens. I mean, you see the craziness, about bringing back coal mining jobs, and start with both things of we don't need more coal. And the number of people in coal mine jobs is, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude less than the number of people in clean energy.
Yeah.
It makes no sense, but it has this emotional appeal. And that's, to a large degree what drives politics. And so I completely agree that it can be revoked.
All right, I think we have a couple of questions over here. I think the one in the back had his hand up first. Is there a mic there? Oh, okay, right here. Okay, we'll go you first and then over there in the back. Go ahead.
I personally don't think this is all about man versus machine or human versus machine. Every time I see the population, or when I go to India or any developing country, I think AI can bring immense good to a huge number of people. Think about going to a doctor or seeing a doctor is a huge ordeal in many of these countries, or getting education. Distance learning or getting an automated treatment can alleviate the suffering of millions of people. So I think a bigger applicability of AI is in the developing world rather than in the developed world, where the argument is more framed as humans being replaced by machines, whereas in the developing world, it is more about alleviating human suffering by replacing the scarcity of resources.
Got it. You guys want to add to that?
Look, it clearly have that impact. To your very specific example, my son's building a primary care doctor in a conversational AI system. I think that'll be as good as the median doctor, not the best doctors, probably within 2 years. Very likely to be case for primary care. And then we'll go down.
Delivered like on your smartphone, you talk to it, it asks you some questions, and it diagnoses
the
you.
same way you'd have a conversation, initially a text message conversation with your doctor.
Mm-hmm. Say a little bit more about this conversational info. You mentioned it earlier. Elaborate. You see that, you hit it a couple times, but you saw that as the platform.
I love conversational interfaces for the following reason at the end of text messaging. Because you as the consumer don't know whether you're talking to a human being or a machine or some combination of the two. I'll give you an example. There's a company that does nutrition advice. What they actually do is they actually compose 3 answers to every message you give it, and then for now, a human's picking which of the 3 it should send. This is assisted conversation.
Yeah.
But the human isn't composing the messages. They're not looking up the databases to look at the nutrition or the glycemic index of carrots.
Yeah.
They actually pull all that together, compose messages in response, and the human sends it. But frankly, over time,
Right.
90% of the messages will be sent directly.
But right now there's this cooperation.
So in the primary care setting, I think initially 60, 70, 80% of the messages would be sent back by the machine without consulting a doctor. It'd be smart enough to know when to escalate a question that it's asked to a nurse, and the nurse would then decide when to escalate it to a
There's a lot of very routine questions that come up over. In fact, there was Sebastian Thrun was describing a very similar system to me recently at Udacity. They have incoming questions about their online courses, and they have humans who answer in the chat rooms. They had a machine learning system watch the humans. Some of them led to conversions, sales. People decided to sign up, others didn't. And after a while, they started noticing patterns of which kinds of responses were more effective versus less effective. This is a big supervised learning system, basically. And now they have in place a system. that actually coordinate. It doesn't take over the chats. What it does is when someone asks one of those common questions, it prompts their middle tier or less effective salespeople, hey, this is what a smart salesperson would have said in this situation.
I think it's actually gone further. So at Autodesk,
Yep.
I just found this out yesterday. We're using Watson for technical support.
Yep.
60,000 questions are answered every quarter.
So who is this? Where?
This is Autodesk.
Autodesk.
I used to work there.
I've heard of them, yeah.
They're right down the street. No, 60,000 questions a quarter are now answered. They're answered for less than $1 a piece. And if you talk to people in call centers, $10, $15 is not atypical. Bad ones are up to $50. So less than $1. And the dismaying part to some degree is that the customers are much happier with the responses. And so this is a fully automated system, so not even an assistant.
It doesn't even escalate.
No. If it can answer, it will escalate, but 60,000 are answered without any human intervention. And this is in the first year.
What percentage of the questions is that? Is that most of them? Is that
70, 80%.
70, 80%? Wow.
Yeah, that's a pretty good number to shoot for in these conversational AI systems, and then know when to escalate. But there are systems that'll take over the whole conversation. They'll just be aware enough to know if a question's complex to escalate it.
Yeah.
Very cool. So we don't have a lot more time. Let's try and get some real quick questions and answers back. There's one right here in the back.
So a little bit off the topic of AI, but I think online with the theme of exponentially accelerating technology. How worried are you about global warming, given the potential for technology bailing us out, either on generation or carbon mitigation?
Yeah, let's give that a technology AI aspect. Is that going to make us lighter on the planet? Is it a problem with all these data centers?
It's an extreme worry, because these are not easily reversible effects. Frankly, I think global warming is way bigger threat than nuclear proliferation, as I see threats to large-scale societal threats. Here's the problem, and this relates to AI. If I go to MIT and give a talk on AI, I can fill any hall instantly. If I want to talk about energy, I can't fill the halls. The talent gusher is not going into global warming solutions or research. It's going into AI today. Now, 10 years ago, when I went to give a talk at MIT on climate change, I could fill the halls, and the best PhDs wanted to work in this area. Because we've sucked talent out of that area for a variety of reasons, too complex to go into here, the talent gusher is not on AI, so the progress we'll see in AI will be explosive, but it'll be at the expense of other areas like climate science and climate technology.
But maybe they can help each other. I mean, maybe they
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I suspect, just like Cole's curves, a nuclear reactor design, a fusion reactor design is probably better done with an AI, and probably even better done with an AI with a quantum computer, it's probably 5-10 years away, than today.
All right, more questions. Are there some on this side? How about all the way over here? Let me see. Here, let me toss this to you.
Thank you. Vinod, don't you think that capitalism can also revoke democracy through technological change, shifting the balance of power from the mob to the individual?
You know, Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson have written about this, inclusive innovation, inclusive institutions, and that when you can have a concentration of wealth, it can lead to a political concentration as well.
Yeah, look, it's clearly a danger. I'm not an expert in that area. Only thing I'd say is there really aren't any experts that I believe. I think these things are, the combinatorics are so large that it's very hard to predict. So I call everything I say speculation.
Let's get another question. I think the mic is already over here. Yep.
Yes, I have a macro level question, so it probably ties the two together. So we've heard a lot about disruptance on the micro level and value to business in the form of efficiency. How can we use this technology and maybe tie in the macro level as well, like climate change? or unemployment or all these things. How can we, or do you have examples of AI being used as defining the output of how we want society to look? Because neoclassic has clearly failed us, and how or what AI would come up with, what the inputs would have to be.
Look, there's so many ways it's hard to enumerate. But let me take one odd example. If you can fully characterize protein properties, and I know companies in our portfolio that have done that with tens of thousands of protein, you could do natural foods that replace meat, for example. One uses between 1/3 and half the planet's usable land area, depending upon who you believe. If you could revert the need for animal husbandry, you'd save most of that land and really contribute. Now, AI can be used for design of and characterizing properties of food. Jardinier here, a Michelin star restaurant, serves a great burger that's entirely plant-based, and you can't tell the difference. Now, that is a larger contribution to global warming than most other technologies being worked on.
Okay, we are just about out of time. I'm going to take one more quick question. So I think over here, yeah, last question, quick one.
I think in today's world of fake news and affirmative action and things like that, the only true meritocratic segment of society is sports. So when do you think we can replace the referees and the umpires and the judges in the Olympics and the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers?
The sooner the better. I mean, the sooner the better. I mean, all you have to do is look at baseball umpiring,
Right.
which I always thought was an interesting thing, is you take the person on the field with the worst eyesight and you put him in charge of judging what's a ball and a strike.
Right, and obviously they have machines. They now rate the umpires based on whether they call it
The
correctly.
best are in the 80s. The high 80s is the best that a person can do. So
Yeah.
it's clearly a bad idea.
Those of us at home watching on TV, we can see the strike zone.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, it is a little odd.
Instantaneously.
I don't know. I think maybe some fans like to be able to yell at the referee, though. Maybe that's
Yeah, you know, and the kicking the dirt, and it's ceremony and ritual, but
Well,
it doesn't add much.
Maybe
to the
all we have
sport.
left. I'm not sure. But I'm afraid we're out of time, and I would love to be able to continue this conversation. I'm sure we all would. So we're going to take a break, and we all can continue the conversation individually and in pairs. Upstairs, we have a 30-minute break. So there's it's up on the upstairs, right? Yes, upstairs. So we will see you there and be back in 30 minutes. Please join me in thanking Vinod and Carl.
Thank you.